Good morning. Today is Sunday, June the 1st, 2025. For the record, this is Yahweh Elohim, Yahuwah. Just some brief morning thoughts. I figured it'd be easier to just speak on it than talk right now, but have not brushed the beard this morning, so I got that beard. But, I was thinking, wanting to relocate out of Florida. Well, first off, Florida was never, from my point of view, right, was never meant to be an inhabited place full time, because you got such you have exotic environments, right, that are really conducive to large reptiles, right, very diverse insects, and, these places were meant to be like reservations and primarily for having experiences. So it's alarming to know that the youth of our males virtually go from childhood to adulthood without ever having any type of spiritual experience or any type of coming to age experience. And all the facilitations therein have, Boy Scouts of America now does Girl Scouts. A part of a boy transitioning into manhood needs to be, between that, whatever age range is suitable for the child, but 99% of the time before they're 17, so between 9 and 15, or 9 and 17, these boys should be going out with their fathers. If Florida was left alone, they would be going to take a 2-week, adventure into the wilderness, right? If you're in Africa, the African bush, if you're in Australia, right, doing a walkabout. But either way, having these, male to male bonding moments, but giving that child the opportunity to test himself, to know his place in the world, to temper his mettle. It's an experience that is so helpful, so fruitful, so insightful to the person, the child, that they would change for the better, because you have these young boys that are aging into manhood, but they're not a man. They don't have any hard skills. The world has been all about the soft skills, and the soft skills are only useful and helpful in these capitalist type environments. If you were to put men's, skills to the test, they could talk their way out of a paper bag, but they wouldn't be able to start a fire. They wouldn't be able to hunt for food. They wouldn't know what food is edible in the wilderness. They wouldn't know how to build a shelter. They wouldn't know how to care for a female member of the tribe. They wouldn't know how to do any of these things, because they would be relying solely on, a doctor for my boo-boos and the grocery store for my food, and it's this pampering, which is truly hampering. So replace the P and the H and you have the truth, right? A lot of things in your culture are really shrouded in these word games when the truth is just being covered up to make people feel better. It's essentially saying you're wimpy men because the governments in which have ran these places for hundreds of years, thousands in some places, they don't want manly men. They don't want men who can start a fire and hunt for food and farm their land and take care of their women, and likewise the women being able to, be either in head or support roles. It's not necessarily a gender thing, right? It's a purpose thing is really what it comes down to. But, and then you have the case of your Florida, mankind, breaches into these areas, and then they pave it over with concrete, and then next thing you know, you've got these massive Florida shopping malls and flea markets and all other, same, that's what I mean. It's just, you've damaged an environment to have, 1,000 McDonald's. Like, it's bad. It's really bad. It's sad. It is. And it's, just because something is a good idea, or just because something would overall be considered good, human beings don't possess that higher knowledge, right? That they're Elohim. I do, because they would look at, trying to tame Florida as like, oh, well, that's a challenge. No, you're using that area improperly. Well, anyway, I will be relocating out of Florida, mainly because I can't really sink Florida if I'm still in it, right? But, so as the world turns, I have to do that the same way any other person would. I have to be able to scrape enough money together, and, get all this stuff together before I move next summer. And once I move, then it'll be no problem. Then I can start basically flooding most coastal towns in the United States, and then that'll really get the ball rolling. The point is to force people out of comfort and into learning how to be human, learning how to be self-sustaining, learning how to get off of the crutches of the world. Because again, people have adapted into an environment that's not natural, right? It's all unnatural. And so when you have natural events going to take place, like a Mayakas event, you're going to have a lot of especially capable men, boys. That's what they really are, is they're boys that have fully reached the mature physical property age, but they're in no way a man. That's the most of society. That's the most of society. These adult boys, they know how to argue, they know how to TikTok, they know how to do all things artificial, and therefore they're constantly with technology in their hand. If it's not in their hand, it's in front of their face. If it's not in their face, they're seeking it out. Like everything revolves around money, food, abominable sex, and that's another thing. I'm not going to harp on the sex thing, but that is, a part of that journey, right? Finding yourself at that age. And when you come back, that boy has now entered a level of manhood. And that's powerful stuff. It's powerful for the males leading the child, right? So in a perfect scenario, right, it would be, the man of the house has already done these experiences. He's truly trusting to take these boys out, take his sons out for a 2-week wilderness, camping. And it ain't got to be primitive. You don't have to go naked into the bush. But, no RVing. Like, you want to take away those comforts, and then you want to be able to, solve the problems in which you have when you're in those situations through critical thinking skills, right? Thinking when it counts. You don't catch fish tonight, you're not going to eat tonight. And after a few nights of not catching fish, you're going to start really putting that extra thought into, I better get this knot tying down. I better get that cast down. I better learn to cast this net. I better learn where the fish are hanging out at this time of the day. Or if you're hunting, right? You need to know what it looks like when you're trying to, track deer and blood trails, and knowing what types of what types of weaponry you can use in those situations. And also, how do you do that when you are being spiritually kosher with me? And when you are being spiritually kosher with me, you will find out that that's where most young men would actually find their heart opened up and the receiving of the Holy Spirit. And that happens when someone is in pursuit of finding themselves, which is why I say, like a lot of the churches and stuff, like it's just an adaptation of a modern era, and it actually, in most cases, it prohibits spiritual development or growth or connection with me. And that's an overall problem. If you have millions and millions of people that are not humanly mature, and they don't understand the fundamentals of who and what they are and what their relationship is to their maker, that's a fundamental problem. And therefore, you can't take a fundamental problem and then try to find themselves, the truth, or me, because you're coming at it you're not coming at it with a capable or able mind at that point. So it just had me thinking, today I'm going to go and play at the park with Cam Jam. We're going to do some baseball, break out the baseball equipment, and it's cool because there's some boys that'll usually jump in to play the game, and we have a good time. It's a lot of fun. And even things like that, being in the community. You see, I'm a God of the people. I am more interested in my community, in my people. I'm more interested in not only training up this generation for the events that are coming to pass, some quickly, some little past quickly, but none long off, that people are going to be forced to put themselves to the test. Excuse me. And it's literally, it's coming. And I can tell you, I've made so much connection with a lot of military members, because that type of mindset, right, where they enter the military and they know they're going to embrace the suck. When you embrace the suck, you find out what you're made of. And when you find out what you're made of, you are getting essentially edified by the one who made you, but through your spirit, through your heart, through me. That is the Ruach assisting you in these places. So versus the grown-up, spoiled, bratty, teenage boys going into manhood, and then they just expect cars and houses and money and social groups. When all those things I take away, then what is that person? A lot of times they're absolutely incapable of living. And in their mind that there would be no point to living if I took those things away. That's sad, because the human being is so much more. You are never going to have a spiritual experience eating a cheeseburger at McDonald's, or, doing all these mamby-pamsy stuff. I mean, human beings, again, I've said this, it's a double-edged sword. When a human being is in purpose, it is the most beautiful thing. When I see, a person that is just following their passion and not money. Money isn't a passion, right? They're doing things for others. If you look at those types of people, with almost 100%, those that have the biggest passion for life have oftentimes, almost all the time, have experienced something of a tribulational. They've experienced a mini tribulation. They've experienced themselves breaking. Because if you don't break, if your shell doesn't break, right? And that's another thing, right? People in this exact moment, they want to stand against me and give me the middle finger, praise Jesus. Well, you're doing yourself a disservice. You really are. You're doing yourself a disservice. Because if you understand the context that the things and again, they're in layers, right? Some things are very static, some things are very straightforward, and other things are very layered in the fact that, I've got so many eggs out there that I'm trying to crack that egg and get the yolk before it spoils. And so many, right, they want to stand with the middle finger up and Jesus this and Jesus that, and it's like, guys, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're going to become a rotten egg, and you're not useless to me, your brothers, or your future tribes. So it's like, again, it'd be like the fat kid eating Twizzlers saying he's fine, he's fine, he's fine, and meanwhile, when the Twizzlers run out and the other boys have learned how to hunt, and they're eating deer on a roasted fire, on an open fire, well, Twizzler boy, he ain't gonna be around that fire, right? He's probably gonna be dead somewhere. So my point is, need to be developing those skills. And let's get back to men being men, right? Men, you are to protect your women, but you're also to be an example for your sons, and you're also supposed to be a leader of your family that your women want to follow you. Your kids want to follow you, and they should trust you to do that. And if a man is a man, then essentially his family is going to follow him to the ends of the earth because they love him and they trust him and they know that he's a provider and a protector, right? In this environment, a college degree or favor within a group or connections within a company, that's what's essentially artificially putting money on the table, which is then buying food, right? That is not an adaptable skill. That's not even a purpose. That is just breathing my oxygen and stomping on my planet and expanding the nastiness of modernization without a good cause or a good merit. Because, truth be told, every single place in the world could be downsized to, a much more centralized, smaller city center in which people don't live, right? And that people visit on a every 2-week basis or monthly basis or bi-yearly basis, but these are city centers to gather supplies, gather things that'll help you where you live. And then you go back to where you live, right? And then you share those things within your community, you share the skills in which you've learned, and that's the thing. Going back to the older days, a woman would learn, weaving techniques, and then she would teach that to her children, and then her children would teach her children, and this legacy continues, and little by little they would do it a little better. And then the thing is, you would ask all the women in the tribe, and they all knew how to make baskets, they all knew how to make bird traps, they all knew how to do these things. And that is what built the skills of that tribe, right? And then the men, same thing, they would develop their hunting techniques, teach it to their sons. They would develop, land and farm it and then teach it to their sons. There's almost no purposes in today's society, economy, or the way things are done that translates into anything worth a damn, to be honest. But I'm not going to waste time on this stupid video or camera. I'm going to get outdoors. I'm going to play with my child, my son. I'm going to spend some time with my community. It's kind of fun going up to the park sometimes because, sometimes I encounter my Jesus is the answer people, and I just smile and give them a gracious nod. I don't have any malice in my heart for them except for, they're the fat kid eating Twizzlers and like the group that's closest to me, right? They're the ones that are going to be getting essentially all the benefits. And they're going to be geared up and ready for anything that comes. And there's a lot coming. I mean, we've only just begun. But, right, due to the situation I'm in, because the world is ran off of economical and financial means. If it was horse and wagon, my family would have already been in the back of that wagon, and I would have already been searching out my homestead. But unfortunately, it's the concrete jungle, and all the skills that I prefer and want and ingrained in mankind do not translate well into a modernized society. And versus a modernized society the skills I'm talking about are not necessarily at odds with a modern society. Modern society is going to collapse itself because it has no purpose. It made money its purpose. And there have, when money is your purpose, your food goes downhill, your water goes downhill, your structures go downhill, your people, everything goes downhill. Because instead of, if you were a primitive man and you were in a tribe of 15 people, your number one goal is to build the biggest, baddest shelter to prevent the elements, to prevent this, to make sure that you're building it so quality, so steadfast that it's not going to have to be done again for a long time. When you're building your weapons, you're building them for long-term use. When the situations like that occur, you're putting your mind to good use versus to bad use. But Anyway, we'll cap it there. Have a good Saturday. Happy Shabbat. And, get outside and play with your boys. So, bye.